It was 7:15 on a Tuesday morning in Aurora, Colorado. The coffee machine was still hissing when my wife slid a stack of crisp legal papers across the counter, right next to my mug. Divorce. 22 years reduced to a pile of yellow sticky notes showing me where to sign. Most men would have gone pale, begged for answers, maybe even dropped to their knees. I didn't. I picked up my pen, took a slow sip of black coffee, and started signing. Page after page, steady hand, no hesitation. She stood there in her yoga clothes, waiting for me to explode, to plead, to fight. Instead, I gave her exactly nothing. Just a signature. Because what she didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that I'd already seen the truth months ago. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, GPS logs. She thought she was setting fire to my life. She didn't realize I was already standing outside the house, watching it burn. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm 48 years old, and for the past 20 years I've made my living as an IT consultant here in Aurora, Colorado. Not the flashy kind of tech work people brag about in Silicon Valley. No startups, no billion-dollar exits. I help small businesses keep their computer systems alive, their data safe, their networks running. It's steady work. It pays the bills, bought the house in the suburbs, and kept the lights on for 2 decades of marriage. People say IT guys are boring, predictable. Maybe they're right. I thrive on systems, on structure, on solving problems before anyone else even sees them. That's why the papers on the kitchen counter didn't rattle me. I'd already seen the bugs in this system. Because in every marriage, just like in every network, there are warning signs. And if you know how to read them, you realize the crash isn't coming. It's already here. For 22 years, Melissa and I built a life in the suburbs of Aurora. The house sat on a quiet street lined with trimmed lawns and basketball hoops over garage doors, the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever seems to change. We had routines carved into stone: coffee at 7, grocery runs on Saturdays, Sunday dinners at her parents' place in Denver. From the outside, it looked solid, even enviable. But inside the walls, the air had shifted. Silence stretched longer, conversations shorter. We weren't fighting, not really. It was worse than that. We were coexisting, like 2 employees sharing an office, polite but detached. 22 years together, yet lately it felt like I was living beside a stranger who still knew where I kept my socks, but not what kept me awake at night. That morning, as I stared at the divorce papers, I realized something. The marriage hadn't ended with her signature. It had ended months earlier, quietly, without witnesses. That Tuesday morning looked ordinary. The sun spilled across our kitchen counter, catching the steam rising from my mug. I could still hear the neighbor's lawn sprinkler ticking in rhythm outside. But right there, in the middle of the calm, sat a stack of papers that didn't belong. Fresh from a downtown Denver law office, crisp pages, yellow sticky tabs marking where I was supposed to sign. Melissa set them down like a waitress dropping off a check. Not accidentally, she was too deliberate for that. She positioned the divorce papers exactly beside my coffee, making sure I couldn't miss them. She wore her yoga clothes, hair tied back, face composed as if she'd rehearsed this scene for weeks. "I want a divorce, Daniel," she said, not even meeting my eyes. 22 years of marriage, reduced to a transaction over breakfast, and she expected me to crumble. What she didn't expect was the way I reached for the pen. "I want a divorce, Daniel." The words hung in the kitchen like smoke. Melissa twisted the cap of her water bottle, avoiding my gaze, her tone rehearsed, almost mechanical. She thought she was detonating a bomb. She thought I'd plead, rage, maybe fall apart right there on the tile floor. Instead, I studied the documents as if they were just another contract from a client. 22 years of life together compressed into neat lines of legal text, highlighted signatures, and a clerk's stamp in the corner. I felt no tremor in my hand as I reached for the pen. I could sense her confusion. She'd choreographed this performance in her mind, my protest, her triumphant exit, but she hadn't accounted for silence, for composure. I signed the first page, then the second, steady strokes of ink. She finally asked, her voice sharp with disbelief, "That's it? You're not going to fight for us?" I kept signing. Page after page, my pen sliding across the lines as if I were authorizing a routine software contract. No hesitation, no shaking hands, just ink on paper. The clock on the wall ticked loud in the silence, each second punctuating the fact that I wasn't giving her the scene she'd imagined. Melissa's breathing quickened. She shifted from one foot to the other, eyes darting to the papers, then back to me. She wanted resistance. She wanted a fight. Instead, she got efficiency. My signature was the same as it had always been, steady, practiced, detached. When I pushed the signed stack back across the counter, I lifted my coffee mug and took a slow sip. The aroma of dark roast filled the air, ordinary and calm, in brutal contrast to her expectations. "There you go," I said quietly. "All set." She blinked, stunned, as if waiting for the breakdown that never came. The silence didn't last long. Melissa's voice cracked through the kitchen like glass shattering. "That's it? You're not even going to ask why?" She stared at me as if I'd broken the script, as if I'd forgotten my lines in the play she'd written inside her head. Her eyes were wide, her tone pitched higher than usual, almost desperate. She expected confrontation, begging, anything but the calm she was facing now. I set the coffee mug down carefully, meeting her gaze for the first time that morning. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, catching the tension in her face, the tight jaw, the restless hands gripping that water bottle like a lifeline. "Should I?" I asked, keeping my voice level, unshaken. For a moment she faltered. Whatever answer she'd prepared seemed to evaporate. The truth was, I already knew why. The question wasn't whether she'd cheated. The question was how long she thought she could hide it. I studied her in that moment, really looked at her. On the surface, Melissa was still the woman I had married, 45, striking in her own way, able to turn heads when she walked into a room. But behind her eyes, I saw something else. Distance. A quiet wall that had been building for months, maybe years, brick by invisible brick. I remembered the silences at dinner, the empty smiles at family gatherings, the way she reached for her phone instead of my hand. Those small cracks had widened until they felt like canyons. Standing there in our spotless suburban kitchen, it hit me. This wasn't the morning my marriage ended. That had already happened long ago, quietly, without signatures or lawyers. She wanted me to ask, why? But I didn't need to. The truth was written all over her face, and deep down, I realized she wasn't surprised I could see it. She was terrified I finally admitted it. I lowered my eyes back to the stack and signed the last page. My pen scratched across the line with the same calm efficiency I'd used on the first. No dramatic pause, no second thoughts. Just Daniel Hayes, handling business the way I always had, direct and final. When it was done, I stacked the papers neatly, tapped them square on the counter, and slid them back across the polished granite toward her. 22 years of marriage compressed into a motion as simple as returning a receipt. Melissa didn't move at first. She stared at the papers as if they might rearrange themselves, as if the story she'd written in her head could still be salvaged. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I reached for my coffee again, the steam curling in the quiet. "All set," I said softly. She gathered the papers slowly, like they were heavier than she expected, and then she turned to leave. Her heels clicked down the hallway, each step echoing through the house we'd shared for more than 2 decades. A door opened, then shut. Silence filled the kitchen, thicker than the steam rising from my coffee. For a long moment, I just sat there, listening to the emptiness. And then something unexpected happened. I felt lighter. Not devastated, not broken. Lighter, as if someone had lifted a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. The tension that had lived in my chest for months seemed to dissolve with every sip of coffee. Most men would say the end of a marriage is a collapse, but in that quiet suburban kitchen, it felt more like release. The pretending was over, the guessing games finished. I didn't feel like a man abandoned. I felt like a man unshackled. And deep down, I wondered, had I been waiting for this moment all along? People might think I was numb or too cold to care. But that morning, my calm wasn't apathy. It was clarity. I'd already lived through the collapse months before. By the time Melissa laid down those papers, I had accepted the truth. I'm an IT consultant. My life revolves around patterns, systems, and data that never lie. I can see when something's off long before anyone else notices. And in a marriage, the glitches are no different. Her routines had changed, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. I didn't need a confession to understand what was happening. The evidence was already written across credit card statements, GPS logs, and the perfume she wore home at midnight. So when she tried to break me with a stack of paperwork, she was months too late. The real fracture had already happened in silence, and part of me almost welcomed the honesty of it finally being on the table. In my world, data doesn't lie. Servers crash, networks fail, users make mistakes, but the logs always tell the story. Marriage, I learned, works the same way. If you know what to look for, the evidence is everywhere. It started small. Melissa had always been predictable with money. Groceries on Tuesdays, gas on weekends, the same salon charge on the first Friday of every month. Nothing extravagant, nothing out of character. Until suddenly, the pattern broke. New charges appeared on the statements. Expensive lunches at restaurants I'd never heard of. Wine bars in neighborhoods we never visited together. Then came the hotel bookings, twice in the same month, both less than 30 minutes from our home in Aurora. Why would someone need a hotel room in their own city? I didn't confront her, not then. I just logged it away, like a system error waiting to repeat. And I knew it always repeats. The first real crack showed up on a credit card bill one Friday afternoon. I was reconciling our joint account, something I'd done for years without a second thought. But this time, the numbers stopped me. $180 for lunch at a place called the Copperfinch downtown. I'd never been there. Melissa never mentioned it. And lunch? She worked part-time, claimed she ate light during the day, usually a salad from the cafe near her yoga studio. But this wasn't a salad. This was cocktails, appetizers, entrees, desserts, the kind of bill you rack up when you're celebrating or impressing someone. I stared at the line item for a long time, imagining her at a white tablecloth table, smiling across at someone who wasn't me. It was just one charge, but I knew better. In IT, one bad line of code rarely lives alone. There are always more waiting to surface. A week later, another statement arrived. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Grocery runs, gas fill-ups, the usual. But halfway down the page, I froze. 2 separate charges from the Hyatt Regency in downtown Denver. Same card, same week. We live 25 minutes from that hotel. We have a perfectly good house in Aurora. There was no business conference, no family in town, no reason on earth for Melissa to spend the night in a hotel so close to home. I looked up the dates, ran them against our calendar. On both nights, she told me she was at her book club. I could almost hear her voice, breezy and casual. Don't wait up. I didn't need to imagine what those hotel rooms were for. The statement spelled it out in black and white. Data doesn't lie, and once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. For years, Melissa wore the same perfume, light, floral, something she'd pick up at Nordstrom during her monthly routine. It was as familiar to me as the smell of our morning coffee. Comforting. Predictable. But sometime last spring, I noticed a change. She'd come home from her so-called book club meetings wrapped in a fragrance I didn't recognize. Richer, heavier, the kind of scent that lingers in the air long after its owner leaves the room. One evening, she leaned over to kiss my cheek goodnight, and the smell clung to my shirt. I checked the Sephora bag in the bathroom trash 2 days later. New brand, expensive, nothing like what she'd worn for decades. Perfume doesn't change by accident. Not after 22 years of consistency. A new scent meant a new audience. She wasn't buying it for herself. She was buying it for whoever was waiting on the other side of those hotel doors. Melissa used to treat her phone like an afterthought. She'd leave it on the kitchen counter, the living room couch, even the bathroom sink. I was the one reminding her not to misplace it. For 20 years, it never mattered. We trusted each other. But suddenly, the phone was glued to her hand. When she set it down, it was always face down, like she was afraid the screen itself might betray her. Every buzz or vibration sent her scrambling, excuses tumbling out of her mouth faster than the notifications could appear. She started taking it into the bathroom every time she went, even for a 2-minute shower. I'd hear the muffled ping of messages behind the door, followed by her silence, then the flush of the toilet as cover. In AT, I've learned one thing. The more someone hides their screen, the more their secrets live inside it. And Melissa's phone had become her fortress. The final piece came by accident. Melissa's SUV had been acting up, the navigation system freezing every time she tried to enter an address. She asked me to update the software, and while I was in the settings, I pulled up the recent destinations to clear the cache. That's when I saw them. An apartment complex downtown, a boutique wine bar in the business district, a parking garage near Union Station. None of these places fit her routine. Melissa wasn't the type to explore new spots alone, and she'd never once mentioned visiting them with friends. The timestamps lined up perfectly with her book club nights, right down to the minute she claimed she'd left the house. I didn't need a confession. The car itself had logged her trail, digital breadcrumbs leading straight to the truth. In IT, we say every system leaves footprints, and my wife's car had just traced hers across Denver. By then, the case was airtight. Credit card bills, hotel rooms, perfume, phone habits, GPS logs. The evidence stacked higher than any lawyer could have built. But I didn't confront her, not once. Confrontation only feeds denial. In IT, if a server is failing, you don't scream at it. You monitor, you log, you wait for the inevitable crash. That's exactly what I did with my marriage. I became an observer in my own home, cataloging each inconsistency, each carefully rehearsed excuse. Melissa thought she was playing a role I couldn't see through. She didn't realize I was studying her like corrupted code, watching the system degrade line by line. Every night, I filed the evidence away in my mind, not out of bitterness, but clarity. She was leaving long before she admitted it. So when she finally placed those papers on the counter, it wasn't a shock. It was just the system crashing exactly on schedule. The strangest part wasn't the evidence, it was the act she kept up. Melissa still played the role of wife like a seasoned actress unwilling to leave the stage. She smiled at neighbors when we walked the dog, hosted book club nights in our living room, and asked me about my work in the same polite, distracted tone she might use with a stranger at a cocktail party. At dinner, she'd sit across from me, fork in hand, nodding at my stories but never really listening. Her phone rested face down on the table, buzzing occasionally, and she'd brush it off with a casual laugh. "It's just Paige," she'd say, or "work emails." Always a neat excuse, always just believable enough. But I knew better. The smiles were rehearsed, the small talk scripted, the laughter hollow. It was all a performance meant to keep the facade intact. And the more she pretended, the clearer it became. She wasn't fooling either of us. That morning with the divorce papers wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the final curtain call of a performance we'd both grown tired of. Melissa thought she was staging a dramatic finale, handing me those documents like a dagger meant to pierce. But I already knew the wound had happened months before. As I signed my name, I realized the papers weren't about dissolving a marriage. They were about putting an official stamp on what we'd both been living. Distance, detachment, and silence disguised as civility. The paperwork didn't end our marriage. It simply ended the pretending. She watched me for a breakdown, for some desperate plea that would validate her role as the aggrieved wife. But I gave her nothing. Just signatures. Just closure. 22 years reduced to ink and carbon copies. And as she carried the stack away, I understood something. Freedom sometimes looks exactly like surrender. When the door shut behind her, I sat alone at the kitchen counter with nothing but a cooling mug of coffee and a stack of freshly signed papers. I expected to feel broken, but instead I felt lighter, not gutted, not lost, liberated. The truth, I realized, had been chasing me for months. It haunted the receipts, clung to her perfume, buzzed through her phone, echoed in the GPS logs. Every clue had whispered the same thing. She was gone long before she left. And now, with the papers filed neatly away, the whisper finally stopped. I wasn't devastated by the end. I was relieved by the honesty. Pretending had been the real burden, and I hadn't known how heavy it was until it was gone. Freedom doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the hush of a suburban kitchen, with nothing more dramatic than a pen sliding across paper. 3 days later, Melissa was already at work rewriting the story. She met her circle of friends for brunch at the Copper Finch, one of those Denver spots where the omelets cost $18 and the waiters wear designer sneakers. I wasn't there, but social media told me everything I needed to know. Paige Monroe posted a photo of their mimosa tower, captioned, "Supporting my girl through tough times." Rachel Collins and Michelle Dalton tagged themselves in the background, all smiles, champagne flutes raised. From the outside, it looked like a support group. In reality, it was Melissa's stage. She wasn't grieving, she was performing, painting herself as the blind-sided wife, abandoned without reason, left to gather sympathy over avocado toast and Prosecco. What she didn't realize was that not everyone in her audience bought the act, and one of them would soon hand me the script she'd been rehearsing. That night, scrolling through my feed, I saw it again, the same photo that had popped up earlier. A pyramid of mimosas sparkling under the Denver sunlight, captured at just the right angle. Paige Monroe had tagged the location, geotagged the time, and added a caption dripping with sympathy. Supporting my girl through tough times. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than brunch. But I knew better. That tower wasn't just champagne and orange juice. It was Melissa's prop, proof to the world that she was the wounded one, surrounded by loyal friends lifting her up. The filters, the hashtags, the performative smiles, all of it told me she was already spinning her narrative. Divorce in her hands wasn't tragedy, it was theater. And what made me smirk, sitting alone in my apartment, was the certainty that someone at that table didn't fully buy her act. I wouldn't have to wait long to find out who. Around 11 that night, my phone buzzed across the coffee table. Unknown number at first, but then I saw the name, Rachel Collins, Melissa's friend. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Daniel? Her voice was thick, words slurred with alcohol. I could hear bar chatter behind her, the unmistakable chaos of too many cocktails. I had to call you. I leaned back in my chair, watching the Denver skyline outside my window. Rachel, everything okay? Not really, she laughed bitterly. I just wanted you to know, your wife is completely delusional. That caught my attention. Rachel wasn't the type to sugarcoat, even sober. Drunk, she was brutally honest. How so? I asked. There was a pause, a clink of glass, and then her words spilled out like a secret too heavy to hold. She's painting you as the villain, Daniel, and she actually believes it. Rachel's voice steadied for a moment, as if she wanted me to hear this clearly. She sat there today, sipping champagne, telling us how cold you were, how you just signed without even asking why, how you didn't care about 22 years of marriage. I let her words hang, picturing Melissa at that brunch table, her eyes wide with practiced sadness, her voice lowered to just the right pitch to invite sympathy. I could almost hear Paige and Michelle making all the appropriate noises, nodding along, offering tissues that never touched real tears. She made it sound, Rachel continued, like you threw her away without a second thought, like you're heartless. I couldn't help but smile. Heartless? No. Strategic? Absolutely. Melissa wasn't just living her narrative, she was selling it. And the irony was, the more she tried to paint me as unfeeling, the freer I actually felt. Rachel sighed into the phone, the sound of ice clinking against glass. She's got this whole narrative worked out, Daniel. The poor abandoned wife. The cruel, unfeeling husband who signed away 22 years without even asking why. I pictured Melissa leaning forward at that brunch table, lowering her voice just enough to draw her friends closer, spinning the tale with practiced pauses. She knew how to command an audience, even if the story wasn't true. And with mimosas flowing, sympathy was easy currency. They ate it up, Rachel continued. Paige, Michelle, they were nodding, consoling, promising she'd start her new chapter. They treated her like a victim of your indifference. Victim. That word almost made me laugh. Melissa wasn't a victim. She was an architect, building a stage where she could star as the wronged woman. But what she didn't know was that one of her supporting actresses was already breaking character. Rachel's voice softened, almost sobered by what she was about to say. They don't see it, Daniel, but I do. You're not cold. You're smart. If you didn't fight for that marriage, it's because you already knew it wasn't worth fighting for. I leaned back in my chair, the Denver skyline glowing faintly outside my window. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Out of all the people at that brunch table, I hadn't expected Rachel to be the one to see me clearly. You've always been steady, she went on, measured. If you walked away so calmly, it's because you'd already done the math. She was right. I wasn't heartless. I was calculated. Melissa had rehearsed a tragedy, but I'd already closed the curtain, and the fact that Rachel saw it meant Melissa's story wasn't airtight. Cracks had already begun to show in her performance. When Rachel hung up, I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, staring at the city lights. The pieces fit together now. Melissa wasn't just reacting, she was directing. She was crafting her narrative, starring as the faithful wife betrayed by an indifferent husband. It wasn't truth she wanted. It was control. And I understood something that night. The story didn't have to be true for people to believe it. All it needed was repetition, an audience, and the right performance. Melissa had all three. But here's the thing about narratives. They only matter if you fight over them. And I had no intention of stepping onto her stage. Let her tell the story she needed to tell. Let her friends clap for the performance. Because while she was busy controlling the narrative, I was controlling something far more important: my choices. I didn't call Paige to correct the record. I didn't text Michelle to defend myself. I didn't even bother posting anything online. What would be the point? Explaining yourself to people who already picked sides is just handing them more lines for their script. The truth didn't need my voice. It was already there, hidden in receipts, in GPS logs, in the silence between Melissa's words. I knew it. Rachel knew it. And sooner or later, Melissa herself would have to face it. So I stayed quiet. Let her shape her story however she wanted. Every time I refused to argue, I could almost hear her frustration echoing in the distance, like an actress realizing the audience had stopped clapping. Silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Because in the end, the loudest story doesn't always win. Sometimes it's the calm, unshaken presence of the man who doesn't need to explain a thing. In the past, maybe I would have argued. I would have laid out the receipts, the GPS logs, the hotel charges, stacking evidence like a prosecutor proving a case. But what would that buy me? A louder fight, a messier ending, more drama for Melissa to twist into her script. Instead, I chose dignity. Not because I was weak, but because I finally understood strength isn't measured in how loud you defend yourself. It's measured in how little you need to. Sitting by the window of my apartment, Denver lights flickering against the night, I realized I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not Melissa, not her friends, not even myself. The truth stood on its own, solid and undeniable. And dignity, that quiet refusal to wrestle in the mud, wasn't just my shield. It was my victory. Because sometimes the only way to win a war of words is not to speak at all. In the end, dignity mattered more than debate. Words could be twisted, arguments replayed, but silence carried a weight Melissa couldn't rewrite. I wouldn't win by out-talking her. I would win by stepping out of the play altogether. That decision brought clarity. If dignity was my compass, then the next step was obvious. Cut clean, walk away, and leave nothing for her to twist into another act. No messy battles over furniture, no drawn-out arguments over appliances or decor, just a clean break. So I started small. My office first, the monitors, the files, the framed photo of my parents, one box at a time, carried out to my truck under the quiet Colorado night. There was no anger in the work, just purpose. Each load I carried out wasn't just possessions leaving the house, it was weight leaving my shoulders. And with every trip, my dignity felt lighter, sharper, unshakable. I approached the move the same way I approached every project in my career, with strategy. No chaos, no rushed emotions, just a plan and precise execution. If Melissa expected a dramatic exit, she didn't get one. What she got was order. My home office came first. I boxed up my monitors, labeled every cable, and stacked my client files in perfect sequence. I wrapped the framed photo of my parents, the one that had sat on my desk for 10 years, and placed it carefully on top. Each evening after work, I carried another box out to my truck, the sound of the garage door rolling shut behind me. No shouting, no slammed doors, just the quiet rhythm of leaving. It felt less like moving and more like surgery, removing myself from the house with clean, deliberate cuts. And I knew, if I kept to this rhythm, 12 days would be enough to erase my presence completely. The home office was always my domain, the one corner of the house that felt entirely mine. It made sense to start there. I unplugged each monitor, coiled the cables neatly, and labeled them with tape like I would for a client's network install. My files went into bankers' boxes, arranged by project dates, not a single sheet out of order. The framed photo of my parents came last. For 10 years it had sat on the desk, quietly reminding me where I came from. I wrapped it in newspaper, slid it into a box, and sealed the lid with a strip of tape. When I stepped back, the room looked foreign. Bare walls, empty desk, the hum of electronics gone. The space felt hollow, like a stage after the actors had left. It struck me then. I wasn't just packing up an office. I was erasing my footprint from this house, one box at a time. The bedroom closet was next. Years of life hung there, shirts for business meetings, jackets for winters in Colorado, suits Melissa had picked out for dinners and weddings. I opened the doors wide and let the silence spill out with the scent of fabric softener. My rule was simple. I only took what I bought for myself, or what truly meant something to me. The rest stayed. The expensive navy suit Melissa insisted I wear to corporate events? Left behind. The blazer she chose for an anniversary dinner I barely remember? Still on its hanger. I pulled down my old leather jacket, the one I bought in my 20s, still worn at the cuffs. A few flannel shirts I'd lived in through countless late nights at the keyboard. Practical things. Mine. Each piece I packed wasn't just clothing, it was a boundary. A reminder that I didn't need to carry her choices anymore. Only my own. Some items had no price tag, but carried the weight of decades. In the garage sat my father's old toolbox, its red paint chipped and handles worn smooth from his hands before mine. It wasn't just tools, it was legacy. I carried it to the truck like a sacred object. On my office shelf rested a baseball, scuffed from a foul ball I'd caught years ago at a Cardinals game. The ink of a client's signature stretched across the leather, a memory of a deal struck over hot dogs and beer. That ball went into its own box. And in the bedroom drawer lay a small wooden case with cufflinks and the watch Melissa gave me on our 10th anniversary. Back when gifts still meant something. I kept them, not for her, but as markers of who I was in that chapter of life. These weren't possessions. They were anchors. Proof that some things worth keeping don't take up much space. The shared possessions were easier to part with than I expected. The leather couch we bought for our 5th anniversary, the dining table her parents insisted we take, the coffee maker that brewed our mornings for 3 years, all of it stayed. I didn't want the fight. Dividing furniture like college roommates splitting a dorm set felt beneath me. Chairs, silverware, the TV we picked out together, she could have it all. None of it carried meaning for me anymore. They were props from a play whose run had ended. What mattered were the things that held memory, identity, the toolbox, the baseball, the cufflinks, those were mine. The rest was clutter, tethering me to a life I no longer lived. Walking through the rooms, I felt lighter leaving it all behind. Clean breaks heal faster than messy ones, and I had no interest in dragging the debris of a broken marriage into my new beginning. For 12 straight days, I moved my life out one box at a time. No drama, no shouting, not even a whispered argument. Just silence. Each evening after work, I packed, loaded the truck, and drove across town to the storage unit I'd rented. Melissa never asked where I was taking things. She never offered to help. She just watched me dismantle our life together with the same quiet detachment I'd shown when I signed the papers. We crossed paths in the hallway, two ghosts inhabiting the same house, neither speaking. The garage door would rumble open, the box would slide into the bed of the truck, and the door would shut again, over and over, until the rhythm became mechanical, almost soothing. By the 12th night, my side of the closet was empty, my office stripped bare, my presence reduced to nothing. The house already looked like it belonged to someone else. On the final evening, the house felt like a hotel room after checkout, sterile, empty, stripped of personality. No pictures on the walls, no hum of electronics, no trace of me left, just blank space. I stood in the kitchen one last time, staring at the counter where it had all started. That's where she'd laid down the divorce papers, right next to my coffee. So that's where I left the key. No note, no dramatic gesture, just a quiet handover, the way you'd return a borrowed item that no longer belonged to you. The metal clink echoed in the silence, louder than it should have. Final. Absolute. I walked out without looking back, closing the door behind me like sealing a chapter shut. By the time the sun dipped behind the Rockies, I was standing in a different doorway, one that opened not to the past, but to whatever came next. My new apartment at Summit View couldn't have been more different from the house in Aurora. Top floor, corner unit, with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Rockies. At sunrise, the mountains glowed gold. At night, Denver's skyline flickered like a constellation just out of reach. The place smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Minimal furniture, nothing ornamental. A couch I actually chose, a dining table that doubled as my workspace, and a bed that fit the way I slept, not the way Melissa thought a bedroom should look. No throw pillows, no accent rugs, no compromises. The silence here wasn't tense like it had been in the old house. It was peaceful, productive. I could work late without interruptions, eat dinner without small talk, and watch whatever I wanted without commentary. For the first time in years, the space around me reflected only me. And in that quiet, I realized this wasn't exile. It was freedom. Every morning, I woke to the mountains. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed them perfectly, snow-dusted in winter, blazing red at sunset, steady and immovable no matter what storms passed through my life. That view reminded me there was a world beyond divorce papers and whispered lies. Inside, the apartment was stripped down to essentials. A couch that held me comfortably after long days. A table just wide enough for my laptop and a dinner plate. No clutter, no furniture chosen to impress guests we never liked. Every object had a purpose, and nothing more. It felt like breathing fresh air after years in a stale room. The absence of excess wasn't emptiness, it was clarity. I didn't miss the ornate dining set, the throw pillows, the decorative clutter Melissa adored. Looking around, I saw something rare, a space that matched the man I was, not the husband I had been. And that was more valuable than anything I'd left behind. The strangest part of Summit View wasn't the view or the furniture, it was the silence. Not the suffocating quiet of the old house, where every unsaid word pressed against the walls, but a gentler stillness. The kind you notice only because nothing is demanding your attention. I could work late into the night without glancing over my shoulder. No footsteps pacing the hallway. No questions about why I was still at my desk. The only glow came from my monitors, the only sound the distant hum of the city below. Dinner was simple, sometimes just leftovers eaten at the counter, but it never felt empty. For once, solitude wasn't loneliness. It was relief. After years of pretending, of waiting for the other shoe to drop, I realized I was finally breathing easy. This wasn't survival, it was peace. And peace, I knew, had a way of unsettling those who thrived on chaos. The peace didn't last long. A week into my new routine, my phone lit up with Melissa's name. Not a long message, not even an apology. Just, "Do you remember where we kept the refrigerator warranty?" 2 days later, another ping. "Did you take the spare garage remote? I can't find it." The questions were small, harmless on the surface, but I knew better. She wasn't really looking for appliance manuals or missing clickers. She was looking for a response, a thread, a way to pull me back into the script. I kept my replies short. "Check the kitchen drawer. The remote's probably in your glove box." Nothing more. No questions. No invitations for conversation. The facts were enough. My silence filled the rest. And though she probably wouldn't admit it, I knew my calm answers rattled her more than anger ever could. Each time her name appeared on my phone, I treated it like another task on my to-do list. Quick, efficient, finished. "Where's the lawnmower manual?" "Hanging on the pegboard in the garage." "Did you move the tool set?" "Still in the hall closet." Nothing extra. No "how are you?" No "hope you're doing okay." Just facts. Sent, delivered, done. I knew what she was fishing for. Emotion, reaction, any proof I was still hooked into her story. But I wasn't giving her that stage. Every clipped answer was another wall, another boundary. Sitting in my apartment with the mountains framed in the window, I realized my calm brevity spoke louder than 1,000 arguments. It told her I was gone, not just from the house, but from the script entirely. And the more concise I became, the more desperate her questions would get. One evening, just as I was reviewing a client's network logs, my phone lit up. Not another text this time. A call. Melissa's name glowed on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Daniel. Her voice had that carefully casual tone people use when they're anything but casual. I think we need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the mountains beyond the glass. What kind of talk? I asked. About us, she said quickly. About everything that happened. 22 years. It feels strange to just end it without discussing what went wrong. I didn't say anything right away. Silence filled the line, and I knew she hated it. She wanted me defensive, maybe even angry. Instead, she got stillness. Melissa, I said finally, my voice even, you made your choice the day you signed those papers. And just like that, her script started to crumble. The silence pressed harder, and then Melissa's voice sharpened. That's it? You're not even curious? You're not going to ask me why I wanted the divorce? I could picture her pacing, twisting the phone cord around her fingers the way she used to when she was nervous. She wanted outrage. She wanted questions, a crack in my calm. Instead, I stared out the window at the Rockies bathed in fading sunlight. Should I ask? I said evenly. She hesitated, caught off guard. The line crackled with her frustration. Most men would want to know, Daniel. Most men would fight for 22 years of marriage. I let her words hang. What she didn't realize was that I already knew the answer. The credit card bills, the hotel rooms, the perfume, they'd spoken louder than she ever could. And the only question left wasn't why she left. It was why she thought I hadn't noticed. I let her indignation hang in the air for a moment, then spoke softly, almost conversationally. Melissa, you keep asking why I didn't fight. The truth is, I'd already been living with the answer for 6 months. There was a pause on the line. I could hear her breath catch. 6 months of credit card slips that didn't match your story. 6 months of hotel charges in Denver when we had a perfectly good bed 20 minutes away. 6 months of perfume you didn't wear for me. 6 months of your phone, always face down, always locked away. Her silence told me more than any confession. She hadn't expected me to notice, let alone keep track. So no, I continued. I don't need to ask why. The evidence spoke louder than you ever did. For the first time, it wasn't me left in silence. It was her. I don't know what you mean by that, she blurted, her tone suddenly brittle. You're imagining things. You're twisting it. I could almost see her shaking her head, eyes darting, scrambling for footing on a stage where the script had slipped from her hands. But denial didn't change data. I'd seen enough logs, receipts, and timestamps to know the truth. Sure you don't, I said quietly, not unkind. But it doesn't matter anymore. You asked for freedom. You have it. We both do. She started to respond. Daniel, wait. But I cut in gently. Melissa, I need to get back to work. Good night. And with that, I ended the call. No anger, no parting shot, just a clean click, silence filling the apartment again. On my screen, network code scrolled by, steady and logical. Unlike Melissa's words, the data never lied, and that steadiness was exactly what I chose to return to. After the call ended, I sat back in my chair, staring at the lines of code scrolling across the screen. Melissa's denial echoed in my mind, brittle and transparent. She didn't realize the problem wasn't that she lied. It was that I had already seen the truth long before she opened her mouth. For 6 months, I'd watched the story unfold like a movie with predictable plot twists. The hotel rooms, the credit cards, the perfume, the GPS, all of it left trails she thought were invisible. She forgot who she married, a man who lived by reading data, by spotting what others overlooked. That was her mistake. Not the affair itself, but assuming I'd stay blind. She wanted me to ask why, but why ask a question when you already know the answer? I closed the laptop feeling oddly calm. The performance was over, and I was no longer in the audience. When the silence settled again, I did what I always did. I turned back to work. The spreadsheets, the code, the endless flow of problems to solve. Unlike marriage, unlike Melissa's shifting stories, this world made sense. Patterns appeared. Systems behaved predictably, and when they didn't, I knew how to fix them. My fingers moved across the keyboard, the steady rhythm of typing grounding me. A client's retirement portfolio blinked on the screen, numbers balancing in neat columns. Behind me, the Rockies stood dark against the night sky, steady and unmoved. For years, I had carried tension home, dragging every unresolved argument into my office. Now the apartment was free of that static. Just me, the hum of the computer, and the clarity of logic. I sipped cold coffee, feeling more like myself than I had in months. And that's when the phone buzzed again, this time with a name I hadn't seen in years. The phone buzzed across the desk, lighting up the dim apartment with its glow. For a split second, I expected her name again. Another round of questions, another attempt to reel me back in. But even before I looked, I felt steady. Melissa had no power left to stir me. I finished typing the line of code I was working on, saved the file, and only then reached for the phone. Calm, controlled. My pulse didn't spike, my thoughts didn't race. Whatever waited on that screen, it wouldn't shake me. Not anymore. The truth was simple. Melissa's storm had passed, and I was standing in clear air. I'd built walls out of silence, and behind them I was untouchable. Then I saw the name on the screen. Not Melissa, not a client, someone else entirely. And for the first time in months, I felt a different kind of surprise. If this whole ordeal taught me anything, it was this. Silence unsettles more than shouting ever could. Melissa wanted a fight. She wanted me to argue, defend, plead, anything that would keep her in control of the stage. But the less I gave her, the more her script unraveled. Each clipped text, each unanswered provocation, each polite disengagement left her scrambling for lines. She didn't know how to perform without an audience. And my refusal to play the role she wrote for me drove her further off balance. That was the lesson. Sometimes strength isn't in proving your side of the story. It's in refusing to be part of the story at all. Sitting in my apartment, phone buzzing beside me, I realized I hadn't just survived her leaving. I'd dismantled her control without saying a word. And the irony was, the quieter I became, the louder her desperation grew. When I finally glanced at the phone, I froze. It wasn't Melissa. It wasn't a client. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in too long. Jason. Phoenix. My son. I answered quickly, my voice steadier than I felt. Jason? Dad, he said, his voice deeper now, carrying the weight of years apart. I just heard about the divorce. Mom called me yesterday. For a moment, the apartment felt smaller, the mountains outside dimmer. It had been 3 years since we'd spoken more than in passing, 3 years since I'd really heard his voice. How much did she tell you? I asked. Enough to know you didn't fight, Jason replied. She seemed surprised, said it wasn't like you. His words weren't judgment, they were curiosity, and for the first time in months, I felt something stir that Melissa couldn't touch, the bond between father and son. Jason hesitated before continuing. You know, Dad, when Mom, Linda, told me about it, she said the same thing, that it didn't sound like you. I leaned forward in my chair, the weight of his words settling in. What do you mean? She said you've never been the type to just roll over, to accept something without all the facts. She couldn't picture you signing papers without a word. It didn't add up to the man she knew. Linda and I had been divorced for 15 years, but she remembered me well enough to know my silence wasn't apathy, it was strategy. Jason sighed on the other end. It was strange hearing two different stories. Melissa's version makes you sound cold. Mom's version makes you sound deliberate, and I need to know which one's true. His voice steadied. So tell me, Dad. I want to hear it from you. The whole story. I took a long breath, staring at the Rockies beyond the glass. Jason deserved more than half-truths. He wanted the story. I owed him the truth. She had an affair, I said plainly. I found out months before the divorce papers. Credit card slips, hotel rooms, perfume, phone habits. Even her car's GPS, it was all there. On the line, Jason was quiet. No gasp, no anger, just silence, absorbing. I didn't confront her, I continued. What would have been the point? If someone wants to cheat, they will. If they want to leave, they will. Fighting only gives them ammunition to hurt you more, so I let her think she was in control. I signed and walked away. Jason finally spoke, his voice low but steady. So you knew all along. And you just let her play it out? Exactly, I said. Because sometimes the smartest move is not to play at all. Jason was quiet for a moment. Then I heard him exhale, slow and measured. You're right, Dad. If someone checks out, they're already gone. Doesn't matter how hard you fight, it won't bring them back. His voice carried the calm certainty of someone who'd already seen enough of life to know when a battle wasn't worth the bruises. Mom always said you were steady. Now I get it. You weren't cold. You just knew Melissa wasn't worth the war. I felt a strange warmth at his words. For years I'd worried Jason might resent me for walking away without fireworks. Instead, he saw the logic, the restraint, the dignity. Exactly, I said softly. Some relationships are worth fighting for, and some aren't. The hard part is knowing the difference. Jason let that sit for a moment before replying. Then I want to hear more, Dad. Tell me everything, start to finish. A week after our call, I drove to Denver International to meet him. I hadn't seen Jason in person in nearly 3 years. He walked out of the terminal with 2 suitcases and that same determined stride I remembered from his teenage years. Only now he looked older, sharper, a man fully grown. Dad, he said, setting the bags down before pulling me into a hug. It was firm, almost awkward at first, then steady, as if neither of us wanted to let go too soon. The drive back to Summit View was quiet, comfortable. He took in the mountain skyline, the minimal apartment, the space I had built for myself. Nice place, he said simply, approving without needing to say more. That night, we ordered steaks downtown, catching up on years of distance. For the first time in months, I wasn't just a man who'd lost a wife. I was a father with his son back beside him. The next morning, the apartment felt different. Jason set up his laptop on the dining table across from mine, and for the first time in years, we worked side by side. No tension, no unspoken arguments drifting down hallways, just the quiet rhythm of keys clicking in unison. Sunlight spilled over the mountains, filling the room with a glow that made even spreadsheets feel lighter. I glanced up occasionally, watching him type with the focus of a man building his own future. He caught me once, smirked, and shook his head. Don't hover, Dad. I've got this. I laughed, settling back into my own projects. It reminded me of when he was a teenager, sitting at my desk tinkering with code while I worked late into the night. Different city, different chapter, same bond. For the first time in a long while, the silence in the room wasn't heavy. It was full. And that's when Jason finally asked about Melissa. That night, the sky over Denver opened up. Rain streaked down the tall windows, drumming a steady rhythm against the glass. Jason and I had just finished dinner, takeout pasta, eaten straight from the cartons, when the knock came at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, neither was he. We exchanged a glance, and I rose slowly, the sound of rain echoing through the hall as I unlocked the door. Melissa stood there, her hair damp, her makeup smudged, her blouse clinging from the storm. The same woman who had once left divorce papers by my coffee now stood shivering on my threshold. "Daniel," she said, stepping in without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." She stopped when her eyes landed on Jason, sitting calmly at the table with his laptop open. For the first time that evening, her composure cracked. This wasn't the stage she expected, and she knew it. Melissa sat across from me, her clothes still damp from the storm. Jason stayed quiet on the couch, a silent witness. "I made a mistake, Daniel," she said, her voice breaking. "Derek meant nothing. It's over. I want to try again. Please." Once, those words might have undone me. Tonight, they meant nothing. I studied her face, familiar, but distant now, like a photograph of a place I used to live. "Melissa," I said softly, "you left long before you walked out the door. You chose your path. I chose mine, and I'm not going back." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no triumph, only distance. She wanted a fight, or forgiveness, or some grand emotional gesture. All I gave her was truth. She stood finally, voice trembling. "I hope you're happy." "I am," I answered, calm, certain, and for the first time she seemed to believe it. In the quiet after Melissa left, I looked around my apartment, The view of the Rockies, the glow of Jason's laptop across the table, the steady hum of a life rebuilt. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because I won an argument, but because I chose not to fight one. That was the lesson. Dignity is a decision. Some relationships are worth fighting for, some aren't. And true strength isn't clinging, it's knowing when to let go. Melissa had her stage, her script, her audience. I had peace, purpose, and my son back at my side. The storms had passed, and what remained was clarity. We don't always get to choose how a story begins, but we do get to choose how it ends. So I'll leave you with this. Would you rather argue to hold on to what's already gone, or walk forward with dignity into what's next?